The foliage update is arguably one of the biggest updates for Path of Titans as it paves the way for a lot of content. And today, I'm telling you everything we know about the updates that will arguably change the game in its entirety. So, let's talk about it. We need to start with two questions. What is it? And why are they doing it? Well, the foliage update is one of the big pillars of core content that developers are slowly chugging away at, and it's more adequately known as world updates because these three pillars basically assimilate into world updates. And those three pillars are quests, AI, and of course the foliage, all building and bundling together to form updates to the global world that you'll interact with in the game. The foliage update itself has been going on for a while now, dating back to their first mention of it back in the late February 2024 dev blog, which first showcased us the Lambiosaurus TLC, as well as the new emote wheel and several upcoming pieces of foliage. This, while it was the announced start of the rework, has likely been going on a bit longer than that because obviously the dev showed some work in progress shots, so that means it's probably been in development progress for the game for some time before that. That being said, in that dev blog, the developers announced their intentions by saying this: "We want players to feel more immersed and at home in a prehistoric world and have been creating some ancient flora to help with this. We plan on adding lots of cycads and ferns as well as conifer trees." So the aim is simple: create a more immersive and prehistoric world, something that was starkly similar to their aim to create a prehistoric world with the AI overhauls in both the ocean and on the land. But their other aim was a simple one: better optimize the plants in the game and make them look great on both mobile and PC and consoles all at once, even when on lower settings. The aim was to get the best quality out of the assets, and they are all made in-house. Now there's two reasons explaining the what and the why, but they explained it further in the March dev blog, more specifically for the performance reasons, showing information on the foliage but also showing the development of it. They are also making custom assets, which is allowing them to focus more on performance, especially for mobile and lower end devices. Currently, foliage on mobile is either non-existent, in some cases with most of the bushes, or really blocky and really just horrible to look at. They basically said this: when reducing the number of triangles on a tree, too many details are lost in the tree trunk, which will make forests look unnecessarily blocky. In those cases, it would have been better to instead reduce the triangles at the top of the tree in the canopy, where most players won't really look. But also went on to say that when creating foliage, they are paying extra attention when making assets for the mobile version of the game, removing small details where branches split because on mobile these are hard to see, and their aim is to make sure that this looks good on mobile, or as good on mobile as it does on PC. So making these changes will help that greatly. So that's why and what it is and what they're doing and why they're doing it. Let's talk about all the pieces of foliage that we've been shown so far, because there is a lot. Now that took a while to get through, and this is probably going to take a little bit longer, but I've dug through all of the dev blogs and devlog videos to try and find every piece of foliage the developers have showcased to us so far, and I think I've been able to compile a list of everything. So let's start going through all of them, and let's start it back in the late February devlog, because that's when we first saw content for this. And it was more specifically fern-like trees. They were perfect for smaller dinosaurs to hide among, as they were just taller than a Lambiosaurus, but creatures like Hatzegopteryx would have a hard time traversing it. This was even shown with practical images showing how it would look in-game. Additionally to that, we saw a small cycad example with 3 variations ranging from more complex to smaller ball-like cycads. In that devlog, it's important to know that Jiggy said it would come to both Pandora and Gondwa, specifically the foliage update, not just those specific plants. Next, we move to the March devlog, which showcased 2 variations of foliage, some cottontail-like reeds and some smaller trees, aligning with the more fern-like structures from the month prior. It also is important to note that this is the devlog that they showcased physical examples of the development of the foliage in-game, game, showing various levels of detail, variation for the trees within the game, and spoke more in depth about it and the performance side of things, the levels of detail, the triangles, the polygons, all that jazz that I mentioned earlier. Now, it does get a little bit confusing from here, because in the devlog video for the June devlog, they showcased some Tempskaya tree ferns, which were little trees which were shown both in a render and in the background of the image, which seemed like they were in the engine too, which is basically just a log with a bunch of ferns sticking out of it. The coolest part showcased in this devlog was the sprawling roots, which Jiggy said tower over many dinosaurs in the game, and it's built for smaller creatures in mind. This was showcased with 4 images. The first showcased larger roots, which were huge, perfect for hiding, but also perfect for nest locations because they kind of formed like big areas that were sheltered. The next one that they showcased was a tree grove, which looked more to be built from mangroves, and compared next to a Pycnonemosaurus, they were way taller than a dinosaur, but the roots were a lot smaller, which meant this was perfect for small dinosaurs to hide in. Now, the July devlog was the same, where we actually got to see some cool trees. These were Wollemi pine trees, and showcases the vast variation that they intend to implement for these trees, with some of these with less leaves on them and more brown and dead looking leaves, as well as vast variation in size, starting with very small and working their way up to be towering over everything else. These are said to be coming to forest biomes in the game. In the August devlog, we got both a showcase of them in the blog and in the video. These were new ferns, but they were specifically mentioned to be new food assets, which would be something that you herbivores would be able to eat. This was showcased in 2 versions. There was the version that didn't have the pine cones and the version that did have the fern cones. I said pine cones, the fern cones, but it's the cone that would be edible and not the plant. So if you don't have it, it's not edible. If it is, got it, it is edible. And this will be for the forager diet type. And then we didn't get much until the July devlog this year, which showcased quite a bit. Tying into the rework with some aquatic overhauls, the aquatic crinoids, which would be foliage for underwater. New trees which are aimed to shelter smaller dinosaurs, especially near the water. Blue mosses, which are a quest item. And finally some dead leaves from what I can see from the preview shown in the video. But there was also interactable foliage as well, but these are more specific for the quest overhaul. These were knockdownable trees and scratchable trees. Now, in regards to the foliage updates, there are some stuff that have already been done. For example, the grass was completely changed. It looked completely different before and it's new now, and that's able to move freely in the wind and look completely different. The other updates were to do with the weather, trees moving freely in the wind to actually show the effect of wind in the game. But also there's the berry bushes, how they changed their look to blend better in the forests. Or one of the biggest examples, completely overhauling Grand Plains and Impact Crater, which arguably could be something we could see more of in the future as the foliage updates take hold, like biomes being completely reworked. But there's a little bit more. These aren't exactly tied to the foliage, but they do play maybe an important role. Firstly, the random rock formations popping up in the game, which users theorizes to do with the questing system updates that are coming, or maybe it's blue moss foliage that's going to be placed in those locations, like the nice little area that's kind of laid out. Equally, there's also the changes at the river crossings, which users have theorized are to do with some planned interactive updates in the future, because they've become flatter and it's like something's going to be put there, and it's in various locations as well, not just in one location. The other example, the final one, is the small rock updates in general. Mossy rocks are updated with better textures, for example. But those, aren't exactly foliage, but we did have some foliage updates. Now, this is a topic the developers have been talking about. In fact, the biggest statement from the developers is that this won't be a quick update. It also won't be an update that comes in one big push. The updates to the foliage system will be over time and over the course of multiple updates. And this was quoted from a comment by Jiggy just before the large May update released. And that was the update that implemented the Grand Plains overhaul to the game and the wind updates. And Jiggy said this: "We haven't announced a dedicated foliage update anywhere. This next full game patch will have new shaders, which let all the foliage in the game have wind effects on medium and high settings. Otherwise, in terms of foliage, we are just looking on more prehistoric plants to be added to the game at a later date." This comment was then doubled down by Jiggy again, saying this: There isn't a dedicated foliage update planned that will suddenly replace all the foliage on the map. However, we have some changes we are working on to gradually replace all of the foliage on the map with either updated assets or completely reworked specific biomes on the map. For example, we might tweak the rock and cliff placement in some areas to improve the flow of players in that area, or adjust the bush density in other areas so it's easier to ambush or hide. In March, Matt was quoted by saying this: "We have the foliage guy making foliage, but he is only one person and it's pretty slow. Although that was 7 months ago, maybe things have changed and they've got another person by now, so take that with a pinch of salt." One thing that we know is being worked on is the render distance for foliage as well, because Jiggy was quoted in May with this: "We are definitely working on improving the render distance of foliage like bushes and trees so that players can stay safely hidden from a distance. However, when it comes to the actual dinosaurs rendering in, we have to be careful because of server performance reasons." Now, if we circle back to April, Jiggy was asked how the foliage update is coming along, and she said this: "It's been great. You may have noticed in the recent update that trees and grass now sway in the wind, which is part of the updates for foliage I've been working on." So all in all, the foliage update is a vast update, but it isn't one that is just coming immediately in one big swoop. It's something that will take time, and I personally think we'll slowly see the fruits of that labour come into play in the future. Maybe after Christmas is probably when I would expect these to come about. Foliage also ties into quests. As I mentioned earlier in that August devlog, or July devlog, sorry, from this year, the blue moss and scratching trees and tree knocking over, they're all to do with the quest system as well as foliage reworks. And of course, we'll see this introduce new food sources too. For example, the fern cones, which I showcased earlier. But what are your thoughts? If you want to check out a new video, check out this one, where I went over some mods that you should be excited for, as well as a brand new Tyrannosaur mod. Anyways, I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Peace.